Good morning, listeners. My name is Micah.
My name is Christian. Welcome to the Morning Ponderings podcast.
This is kind of a conversational type podcast where two guys get together and hypothesize about the possibilities of so many different things and try to just see what could be in the universe.
And our hopes are that through conversation, we will open up the door so that empathy for other viewpoints and other hypotheses and possibilities will flourish.
Absolutely. Well, how is your morning, Christian?
Oh my goodness, it has been a week. It's a good morning though, because we're starting to feel better. My son is starting to feel better. He was the last one to kind of have symptoms. My whole family came down with COVID, and we fought it long and hard. I think we're finally at the tail end of it, so
that's good.
Very glad that that's over.
Yeah. How long did you have it?
Let's see. Not this. So a little over a week. So not the previous Wednesday, but the Wednesday before that. And then some of our final symptoms just tapered off yesterday. I don't know exactly how well my wife and son are feeling this morning, just because we just got up. But from the looks of things, everyone's doing a lot better. So your family also came down with COVID. How are your parents doing? Specifically, it was your parents. I don't think your wife or you were touched by it, right?
Yeah, my parents are like 3 hours away, so we have not been touched by it yet. Thank goodness, though we are in a hot spot here in Missouri. But they're hanging in there. They've had it for over 2 weeks now. My dad had a fever for like 2 weeks straight, which was like not good. And I think that he's doing a lot better. I know that he's doing better than my mom, who came down with pneumonia, like COVID pneumonia, which obviously not fun. Had to go get a shot, had to get some antibiotics and all that kind of stuff, and isn't feeling great. Probably got a long recovery ahead, because that's not something that just, goes away like a cold.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was kind of scary at first, especially whenever things kind of started to take a bad turn there with my mom getting pneumonia. As far as I know, my little brother's doing just fine. Just not crazy symptoms, but I doubt he would say if he did have bad symptoms, he'd probably downplay it quite a bit. So hard to know.
Yeah, when you're a teenager and you feel like you're invincible and you just have to put on that front, or at least, how old is your brother?
He is going to be a sophomore in college this year. So he actually just turned 19.
Okay, so he is still a teenager.
Did he turn 20? No. I better figure that out.
Oh, man. Are you starting to feel old yet? I don't even know how old you are. How old are you?
I'm 23. So,
man.
I don't feel old yet, because anyone looks at me and still is like, "You're married?" So, no, I don't feel old yet.
Well, congrats. You have the rights to continue feeling young. I'm 26.
That's not old.
Yeah, it's not that old, of course, but I don't know. It's weird. Every year comes around and it's like, I'm getting that much closer to 30. I'm going to be 27 this year. It just doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
So how is your alter ego, Tyrell, doing? You dropped a TikTok video the other week about that, and then like nothing ever came of it from the sounds of things.
I should have gave an update. Things did come from it, and it was hilarious. And it's one time where I was just dying laughing on the couch. So I keep this persona going. So let me just update the listeners, because I think this is kind of a funny story just before we get into more deep things. But I was put in a random family's group chat out of the blue. And at first I thought, maybe I know these people. Then they started like sending pictures of like them fishing or them at this kid's birthday party and like all this stuff to the family group chat. And I was like, no, I absolutely do not know these people. But I thought it'd be awkward to say something. And also thought it'd be a lot more fun just to see how long I could go before they figure it out. But eventually it got a little boring just watching it all. And one of the people in the group said, all right, I need every person in this group chat to give their name, or not their name because they knew each other's names, but like your birthday, date, and year, and then of your wife and kids as well. And I was like, all right, well, this is the time where they're going to find me out because obviously I can't just make up a date. They're going to know. So I avoided replying that, but they were like really like persistent and they were like, these two people still haven't done it yet. And I just refused to do it. But I decided to like kind of reply and like say something. I'm trying to remember what I said. And everybody was like, whose number is that? Like, who is that? I don't know that number. I don't have that number saved in my phone. But a couple other people did as somebody else named Tyrell. And so eventually, like the next morning, they were getting like super like, okay, who is this? So the leader of the group chat texts me individually and says, hold on, I just need to pull it up because it's so funny. Okay. This person texts me. I have obviously no clue who their name is, though I could have gone in the group chat to figure out who it was. But they're like, Tyrell, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm not who you think I am. They just like, they don't buy it. They actually think I'm Tyrell. So they just like sends them laughing.
Wait, so they
face.
don't believe you when you're
no,
when you told them that you're not Tyrell?
No, they don't. So this person says, anyway, how did you get my old number as your new phone? That's so weird. I know it's you, LOL. We're in the family group chat together. And you responded, LOL. And Candace showed me your contact saved in her phone. You got 2 phones, like Kevin Gates, and just like going back and forth. And I'm like, I'm trying not to just explicitly give myself away. So I'm kind of saying like funny things. And then eventually this person's like, wait a second. I'm going to turn to Sherlock for a second. And they go on this rant about how Tyrell had this phone and then he got a new phone. And these other people still had his old phone number saved in their phone. And so they added him to the group chat by accident long ago, like a while ago, like months ago. And now I am just the random stranger in their group chat. And so they said at the very end, I was already dying laughing because just the fact that they took the time to spend like writing these paragraphs out on how they figured it out was really funny. So they say, and so with that, welcome to the family. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, thanks.
Now that we figured it out, you're welcome. Sure, why not?
Yeah. But so then they asked, so what's your name so I can introduce you to the family? And so, I give them my name and I give them my birthday, but I don't give them the year because I just still felt weird about a stranger having my birthday. And so they actually do introduce me to the group chat, but then they tell everyone, all right, everybody stop replying to this one. We're making a new one because they don't all have iPhones. So they had to like make a completely new one. But everybody was like, oh, that makes so much sense. This is so funny. But yeah, that was a fun time. Maybe I'll save the rest of that story for this podcast and just tell my listeners on TikTok, hey, if you want to hear the ending to that story,
there you go. It's good incentive.
Come on here. Yeah. You got to save something special for here.
Oh, for sure. Wow. So you got adopted by a new family. That's fun.
I did. And then immediately kicked out of their group chat. So, I mean, it hurts a little bit.
Such a close family relationship you've got there.
Yeah. I will say it was a fun group chat to watch because they were very, very energetic and funny people. And like, what got me, and I almost took this bait, is they were going to a Royals game. They're like, all right, who's going to this Royals game? I was like, I could go meet them and they would have no clue.
You could just be hovering around
like,
them.
Hey, where are you guys? I can't find you.
I'm here. I've been here the whole time. They're just looking around like, where?
They'd be like, wait, Tyrell's sitting next to me. What? Who is this? But I decided not to because that would just be strange. And I didn't really want to go to a Royals game anyway.
Though I did meet your alter ego.
I did have that night off, so I could have done it. So as we get into the conversation that Christian and I have, I want to throw a few disclaimers out just so that people know what is coming. For the first half of this conversation, we're going to be talking about COVID and how our view of the afterlife, or even just our view of spirituality, is going to affect how people have responded in COVID and some of the things that frustrate us. We want to reiterate something that we do say in the episode, but I want to say it here again. We are not medical professionals, and so do not listen to us as medical professionals. We are just giving our perspectives on these things the best that we can. So definitely listen to the experts on this. Don't just listen to two random guys talking on a podcast. So with that, maybe you don't even want to hear our opinions on COVID and you really just want to get down to the conversation where we talk about hell and all the implications of that. So if you do, just go ahead and skip ahead to when we really start talking about that, because we are going to spend some time talking about how even the view of the afterlife affects today's response to COVID. And I think it's important for us to talk about the things that are happening right now in our real world. So if you're interested, then stick around and listen to it. If not, I won't be offended. We won't be offended. Just go ahead and skip to later on in the episode. Here we go with our conversation.
This episode, we're going to be talking about eternal judgment and the good old ethics around hell and the way that influences Christianity specifically. We're really kind of zeroing in on Christianity at this point, or any other religion which has a hell-like concept.
Yeah, and I actually did, just for fun, do a little research on some other religions' views on heaven and hell. Mm-hmm. Just to, I probably forgot most of the names and specific connections they have, but I can at least throw some things in there so it's not solely Christianity, because there's some other religions that have views of hell and heaven and
some vague references, if not specific ones. But specifically in the context of COVID, something that I've started to realize that really bothers me, man, this last couple weeks has been a streak of just reflecting upon things that really bother me about evangelism, like Christian evangelism. And this being one of them, in that part of the reason why there's been a bit of an outbreak where I live with COVID is because a Christian campgrounds, which I will not name specifically, I guess, decided that it was worth it to throw a Christian youth camp at their space and invite a ton of different people to come and gather in these close situations. And this led to an outbreak of COVID in my town, which then led to it coming to the church that my wife and I still attend. And then that led to us getting sick from that. And just a ton of other families also getting sick all over the place. And it really made me realize, like, man, we are a dangerous bunch when we are valuing, and I kind of get it coming from especially that background, but there's this tendency to value people's spiritual lives and well-being over their physical lives and well-being, and sometimes even at the cost of it.
Yeah.
Which really rubs me the wrong way, especially nowadays. In that, it's weird to say nowadays, because I mean, why would that have not rubbed me the wrong way before? And it's just one of those situations where you get so indoctrinated and ingrained into this idea that spiritual life and well-being is the most important thing because that's what's eternal. And so if it comes at the cost of the physical life, which is temporary, then it's all worth it. But it's just so wrong to sacrifice other people because there needs to be a God experience at a camp somewhere.
Yeah.
And one of my atheist friends that I was talking to a lot in my exploration of atheism would constantly bring up the fact that missionaries would go to unreached tribes and introduce diseases that those tribes aren't used to the environment. And tons of people would die, but they would justify it and think that it was okay because they got to get Jesus to these people so they don't burn in hell. And it's all fueled by that central concept of hell and fear of hell.
Yeah.
And it's just, that bothers me. That's an effect that the concept of hell has on Christianity and specifically evangelism that really drives a wedge between me and any evangelistic kind of worldview.
Yeah, I definitely this past couple of weeks have felt the frustration with many things. Like I feel like I've just kind of almost been in a constant state of frustration. And I agree. I see that, like, it's just crazy, like the very real effects of the things that we do, that like our physical bodies do. And I've seen it too, like people, Christians, talking about how, they're out to save souls, which I could talk a long time about how that's in itself is kind of dehumanizing, because you're reducing people down to just a soul and not a body, which we are our bodies, but not caring at all about the physical needs of the people that they're helping. And one, that's so contradictory to what you would see in Jesus, because what did Jesus do? He went around healing people. Oh, wait, he touched their bodies. And he didn't always ask if they were saved, I guess, which is just a weird way to even talk about it. Yeah. And he also fed people, like just fed people, like he cared about people's physical bodies. And it just seems like we don't anymore. And I think this comes from our view of our bodies just being this empty vessel that our soul just kind of happens to be in. And one day our soul is going to be separated from that, because we're going to go to one of these afterlife existences. But what we don't realize is that even that is kind of contradictory to what we see in Jesus, because he has a full embodied resurrection. He is reunited, I guess you could say, with his body. And so if you are a Christian, then you should believe that we will also do the same thing. So we should still care about our bodies. And yet, you're right. This whole idea of the afterlife ends up making us not care as much, and especially not care about other people. And then as far as COVID goes, at this point in the pandemic, which has now lasted a year and a half, like it's been a while, people. We've been doing this a while. There is overwhelming evidence that like it's getting harder, I think, to justify all of these claims of the unknown, the unknown. Like we don't really know about the vaccine. We don't really know about masks and their effects. At this point, we're starting to get a lot of data, like a lot of data that like real effects. And you know what we are seeing is that the amount of people dying with the vaccine is incredibly low. Like everybody was saying, oh, this vaccine is going to kill a bunch of people. It didn't. I'm vaccinated. I'm fine. I'm completely fine. I could talk about that a long time. But you know what the evidence also is showing is that people who are unvaccinated right now with this new variant and everything are not doing so hot, because as this thing mutates, it's getting worse and it's not good. And it's just hard that just hard for me to think about the idea that this belief about the afterlife and everything, almost like we were talking in our episode of the existence of God, it makes us deny our own senses. It makes us deny the very evidence that we see in the physical world, because we're so concerned about this thing that we don't actually know about. That we would be willing to deny just very plain facts that are right in front of us in order to secure our spot, as people will sadly manipulate us into believing into this afterlife existence.
Yeah, I feel like that really plays into another thing that's been bothering me about Christianity in general. And that is there's a lot of promotion of bad thinking just across the board, where you believe something to be true without reasonable cause. And that is something that is promoted and even praised among Christian circles of like, oh, you might not have all the information you need in order to be certain of Christianity and its claims, but it's better to fake it till you make it and just lie about how much you know so that you can secure a place in heaven, I guess. And it's just, I feel like that has fed into the distrust that people have towards actual evidence and actual information that they can use to protect themselves and the people they love.
Yeah.
And it's, man, it is just tough. Like, especially in the community that my wife and I find ourselves in right now, we already have an extent of like medical anxiety that we have to push through, my wife and I, unfortunately, in order to bring ourselves to go and do things like get a shot. And I have this like crippling fear of getting a shot, but I'm not opposed to it. I am totally pro-vaccination, and I kind of wish that I had gotten vaccinated, but I didn't. And my wife, of course, she's pregnant, so she couldn't get vaccinated.
Right.
And it was this big mixture of fear in that I just don't like needles.
I get that. I do understand that. I hate them. I've passed out multiple times getting shots.
Oh my gosh. I absolutely hate it. But I contemplated going and doing it a couple times, but life with a toddler just gets super, super busy. And I don't know, I guess you just kind of start to trust and hope other people have done it and that there will be a herd immunity. But man, that was a mistake. If you have not gotten vaccinated yet, I highly suggest going out and doing that. But the other side of that coin, especially in the place where I find myself, where a lot of people are buying into whatever information they read or hear, especially a lot of anecdotal information, is that there's just a lot of fear spread around about the long-term effects of the vaccine.
Yeah.
And that bothers me, but go on.
It bothers me too, because, it's a lot. I've seen multiple posts about this, but it's amazing how many people who have no scientific training, who probably barely passed science in high school, have a lot of opinions that they think are better than the opinions of people who are devoting their whole lives to studying this, which is just the amount of arrogance it takes to do that, I think, is incredible, because they wouldn't probably say that about the people that they do like the people that they want to believe who are experts. Like they would rather like believe them in like other issues, right? But then whenever it comes to this, there's been so much fear. And, I kind of feel for them, because I feel like they have been taken advantage of. Like people have psychologically taken advantage of us in politics and also Christianity to make you believe things that actually have no backing to them. But the vaccine is only in your body for like a very short period of time. And then then your body gets rid of it, right? Like that's scientifically what happens is your body gets rid of it. It keeps the antibodies that it created, but the vaccine is no longer in you. After that, it can't affect you. Like it actually literally cannot affect you once it's out of your body. And so there are not long-term effects. Also, we would probably see some by now.
We should probably make mention that although your wife is a medical professional and she may be able to speak to the whole issue with greater authority, we're not medical professionals, but I mean, there's a lot of information you can find, but it's also tough to say, hey, go out and do your own reading, because people are really, really bad at that.
No, and you should not do that, because once again, if you want to read all the scientific articles that are out there, I mean, you can, but they're written from scientists to scientists. And so you're probably not really going to be able to understand everything. So what we do encourage you to do is go to the CDC or the World Health Organization. These people who are experts, these people who have a $6.5 billion budget to study these things and do research and are actually trying to protect us from what we now are seeing is another wave that has a potential to kill more people than the first wave. So we just really need to be careful and take care of each other and not just care about ourselves, because this is not just a individual issue. This is a world issue, like an American issue. Like it's going to affect everyone. Like your decision does not just affect you. It affects a lot of other people.
Yes. Speak with your doctor and figure out what's going to work best for you. Because I mean, there are definitely some exceptions to getting the vaccine.
Yeah. And
you might have a health condition that comes up. So make sure you talk to your doctor about that. But yeah, it's incredible to me, the ferocity with which people will fight something because they feel like they're being controlled. or that the government's trying to control them. And especially within Christianity, it just doesn't mesh really well from what I understand of it. Like, there's the whole matter of the Roman law that was like put in place, where if a Roman soldier is to approach you and force you to walk a mile carrying their equipment, you're supposed to walk 2 miles. If someone asks you for your coat, give them your shirt also. Mm-hmm. And just all of these things, all of these laws that were put in place to, from what I understand of them, I hear other explanations of it all the time, and it just goes to show how lacking in clarity a lot of the Bible is. But from what I understand, it sounds like we're to go out of our way to be good citizens and love other people before our freedoms, and sometimes even at the cost of our freedoms. Mm-hmm. We are to love other people and to be obedient in whatever, I don't know. It gets muddy. I mean, even when it comes to that, like, you don't obey everything that your government tells you if they're telling you to do terrible things.
No.
So,
and I don't know. Yeah, as far as I do have some insight on the like, if the Roman soldier asks you to go 1 mile, go 2 miles, it was actually illegal for them to go more than a mile. And so once you kind of, the idea is that if you kept on walking, I mean, for one, you are doing more work, but there's going to be this awkward moment where they're like, wait, hold on. What are you doing? Wait, stop. No, you're not allowed to. Wait, what do I do here? And it's because that was a very just unjust law where they were, Roman soldiers were just taking advantage of people. So it was a way to point out, hey, what you're doing is wrong, but not in a way of like screaming and shouting about it and like resisting it, but actually going even farther than they tell you. And so it's this way of being creative, like all of those different parables. There are like 3 of them there are to show how you can point out injustice without being violent, without screaming at people. It's just to point out, hey, what you're doing is wrong, but also I'm going to be the bigger person here. And I don't know. I think there's definitely an interesting concept to that. Yeah.
I think it's also worth mentioning, and I wish I had the passages better memorized, but the mark of the beast, from what I understand of it, is not something you just get accidentally.
No,
it is a very intentional, like, what's the word I'm looking for? A very intentional posturing of one's allegiance or loyalty towards the Antichrist, from what I recall. Mm-hmm. And it's an expression of worship towards whatever entity that might be. And so if you're just getting vaccinated because you don't want to get a disease that will hurt the people around you, that's not necessarily sitting down and worshiping some person or entity. But I mean, I guess you could twist it in some crazy way and say, well, it's worshiping pharmaceuticals and
the government. Yeah. I mean, people have twisted it. That's why people believed in the beginning that it was. And people made so many videos showing them, I don't know, enacting their martyrdom of not getting the vaccine and people killing them. Well, which, by the way, it's also been 1.5 years and nobody's tried to kill you for not getting the vaccine. We're just angry that you refuse to. Anyway, we should maybe move on.
Maybe. So let's talk about hell.
Yes, let's get deep into some of these different views and how that affects. Now, I think it's good that we kind of took this very real world example that we're facing right now and show how that view, or how a view of the afterlife, can even affect now, because I think that does kind of drive people's behaviors, people who are Christian and maybe even other religions. I haven't looked into the outbreak in India was because of religion as well. And obviously it wasn't because of Christian religion, but they had a huge outbreak because their religion made them super against these vaccines, and it got real nasty over there. So this isn't just a Christian issue, though. Obviously that's the world we come from. It's just a religion issue, and it's going to affect other things. And it's an afterlife belief issue. So with that, we're going to get into some of the different beliefs in hell. So listeners, we are about to dive into the different perspectives on hell and just discuss them. So if this is something that triggers you, if you have hell trauma, and if this is something that you don't want to get back into, we would encourage you to maybe skip to later in the episode when we start talking about heaven, which maybe we will also have to save for another episode. Yeah, so we never got there, but don't worry, we'll talk about it next week. So if that's something that triggers you, no hard feelings there. If you just want to not listen to the rest of the episode, but we just wanted to put this here because I know that this can be something that is not fun to talk about and not fun to hear, even though we are hoping to really dispel some of the fears around this and show maybe some better perspectives on it. We still recognize that it can be triggering.
So I think it's good for us to start from a point of familiarity, especially with Micah and I's backgrounds coming from the evangelical sphere. And that is this concept of hell as being a place of eternal conscious torment. And specifically for people who are unsaved, which is such a vague term that I've come to be bothered by.
Yeah.
But unsaved would be basically you have not accepted Jesus as your Lord and Savior. And that's troubling in a number of ways, but specifically touching on what that says about God, should there be a God. What are your thoughts and feelings towards the idea that there might be a benevolent God, or that there might be a God in general, like no attributes attached? What attributes do you feel like that being would have to exist alongside an eternal conscious hell?
I cannot see how a good God would allow a place like that to exist or create a place like that, because if God is the creator of everything, then he created that place. I cannot see how a good God would subjugate anyone to that kind of suffering. This, the kind of suffering that I grew up being told that is just, like you said, eternal, forever, no going back, no way out, torment, where you are just, this is honestly even a little triggering for me to say, and to think about, because certain things come to mind. They talk about the lake of fire and just constant burning and pain and all this stuff. It's usually where people will say, well, for one, God's not sending you there, you are, which I disagree with that completely in many different senses. But even if that's true, that's not justice. If this whole idea is to have justice, then I think we should have a good sense in us to know that there's nothing just about that. Because in the real world, if somebody gave you some timeline, somebody who's really powerful, really important, gave you some timeline, hey, before this timeline ends, which I'm not going to tell you when it's going to end, but because you never know how long you're going to live, you have to sign this document. You have to believe these certain things. And if you do, you're good. If you don't, then for the rest of your life, I'm going to torture you. If somebody did that in the real world, we would lock them up in prison forever because they are a dangerous person who is not a good person. That's not justice. Justice is not giving eternal punishment for finite crimes. There's nothing just about that, actually. Whenever I think about it, now people will counter argument that with, but it's against an eternal and perfect God. But then you claim that this God, that'd be fine if this God wasn't loving, if you claimed he wasn't loving, and if you claimed that he didn't care about forgiveness, because that sounds very vindictive. They're like, oh, you didn't believe in me? Well, then for eternity, I'm just gonna send you off to this place where you're gonna suffer forever.
Yeah, and I think that is a detail that needs to have more focus on it, in that hell is not just a place to enact enact justice for injustice, for horrible, tragic injustices. It's from the perspective that we're looking at right now, it's just a place for people who haven't accepted Jesus, which means it could be anybody, like any person who hasn't done anything terrible.
Yeah.
And it's crazy to me the lengths that Christians will go to shame any human being, to dehumanize somebody enough to say that they are worthy of hellfire. Like a while ago, I mentioned how Lot's wife being turned to salt for looking back at a pillar of fire. It seems like her death was completely avoidable and completely unnecessary. But the number of people who stepped in and say, well, she wasn't innocent, she disobeyed God, and so that means that she totally deserved to die in the way she did. It's like God led the Israelites through the desert with a pillar of fire, and none of them turned to salt. And he could have, if he is all powerful, he could have just snapped his fingers and taken out the city. She didn't have to die. It seems like God just had a death wish and wanted her dead. And that just does not seem just. It doesn't seem right. And it really makes you wonder, can God be all powerful and all knowing if he has to resort to an eternal conscious hell as punishment, and can't actually heal people out of whatever tragic events, traumas, or mental funk has put them in a position where they would commit atrocities?
Right. Or even, like you said, just a normal, pretty decent person that just doesn't believe. Which that's where I saw a video of somebody, like I think we said in the last video, if God knows everything, he's all powerful. He knows what's going to convince me, and he chose not to. So is that kind of on him? And at first, that kind of was like, ooh, like, I don't like that. But whenever I was still a Christian, but now I'm like, well, that's actually a good point. But, I should throw this counter argument out there. Like, okay, guys, you don't like the idea of eternal conscious torment. That doesn't mean it's not true, right? I mean, like, it still could be true, and you maybe just don't like it and have to deal with it. What would you say to that?
What it really starts to boil down to at that point is whether or not God is worthy of worship. And that's something I remember hearing from tons of atheists that I would talk to about how it might be that God exists in the way that Christians believe he does. But you have to step back and ask the question, is this being worthy of worship? And are you willing and ready to burn and suffer in hell for an eternity by refusing and recognizing that this being is not worthy of worship, and so refusing to worship them?
Dang, yeah. There's also this other element of, where are you finding truth? If you're going to say, well, you guys just don't like it, but it might be true, how are you getting that basis of truth? Because none of us have experienced the afterlife, and all the people who claim that they have died and gone to the afterlife, like, for one, they all have wildly different stories. So there's just inconsistency there. So like, I don't trust those at all. Like, I 0% trust those. If anything, I think that's some subconscious thing that happens whenever you're either about to die or coming back to life, that you are kind of in this dream state. Because I've been in dream states where I've passed out, where I've seen some pretty wacky stuff, where I've been in space, like in my hallucinations while I was passing out. So like, that is a very easy explanation, but none of us have been there. So how are you finding that? And most people are going to point to, well, the Bible says this, the Bible says that. All right, listen, if we're going to go to the Bible, for one, we need to recognize some history here. This idea of eternal conscious torment is new. It's not that old. There were some very few people in the early church who believed them. They were the minority. A majority of the people either believed in eternal separation. Well, actually, no, I don't even think that one was.
Wasn't it eradication?
Yeah, annihilation, I think. Where you just cease to exist, which honestly sounds better, because then you wouldn't suffer for eternity. Doesn't sound too bad. It was either that, or, as much as they hate to admit it, hopeful universalism. There were quite a few early church fathers who were hopeful universalists. And so, it wasn't actual universalism where they say everybody will be saved, but it's the hope that everyone can be saved. And there's lots of methodology that goes into that, and like theology that goes into that, because guess what? You can find a verse for any of those views, for all of them. Actually, there are verses that would support that. So it's not a matter of which one the Bible supports. Really, it's a matter of which one do you seem to prefer and choose to ignore the other verses that go against what you say.
And I think that the temptation for a lot of people will be to straw man the idea of universalism and just say, oh, so what you're saying is that anybody who's done any amount of horrible, terrible things is just going to walk into heaven like nothing happened. No, not really. That's not what universalists are tending to get at. From what I know, they reject the idea of an eternal conscious torment. And there's a lot of room in that for different possibilities. One of which being this idea of like a purgatory, where somebody has to work through all of their sin, all of the things which would cause them to hurt other people and cause them to reject God before they can come to heaven. And that's a temporary process and not an eternal thing. And that still falls within the bounds of universalism.
It does, yeah. And that also, when talking of justice, makes a lot more sense, because then you are just paying for what you did, not more than what you did, but you were paying for just what you did. And so for some people, it would be more than others because they did more. And so that, to me, would be justice. Just like in our justice system, we don't send a kid who's 13 years old who stole a candy bar from a grocery store for life in prison because, oh, maybe that's a little unjust. So, yeah, but so I guess we have now thrown in some new ideas. We've thrown in annihilationism, which that says that if you believe in God, have faith, then you go to heaven. If you don't, then you just cease to exist, like you are annihilated, which actually traces back to a lot of Paul's writings. He says, like the wages of sin is death, like death not being a constant death, but like just you're dead, like you cease to exist. That's where like some people get that. And there's obviously lots of other verses. And then we threw in eternal separation. So let's talk about that one for a second, because that one kind of goes hand in hand with eternal conscious torment, but it's a less severe one. So eternal separation, from what I understand, is what C.S. Lewis kind of will say, which is it's not an eternal place of torture. It is a place where you are just separated from God. So just take God out of this world, and it's going to be like that for eternity. Which to do that means to take out love, to take out grace, like all of those different things. So in a sense, it'll be a miserable existence, but it won't be like active kind of like burning and pain that some people will suggest in eternal conscious torment. So it's a better one, I guess. I still don't like it, but go ahead.
It really says something to the idea of human nature, in that if you remove God from the mix, are humans just a bunch of miserable, hateful beings? Like, suddenly, are we no longer made in the image of God? Like, are we completely... It falls into that whole idea of like complete depravity. And humans being nothing without God. And that's weird to think that God would make a creature like that. And make, like, are we even still human beings if the image of God leaves us in an eternal separate space? Like, if the concept of a human being in Christian terms is a being which was made in the image of God, and then there's an eternal separation that happens, are they still human beings? Is there even any point to their continued existence at all?
Yeah. Also, what can exist outside of God? According to Christians, you'd say nothing. So can that even work? Can you even be separate from God? Because how would that place exist? If you think God holds everything together, how would that place even exist? So then maybe you'd get into some middle ground of like, well, he kind of like sustains the place, but isn't there kind of thing. I don't know. It's just like a weird, so then can God separate himself into different attributes? Like it gets really complicated. And obviously we're talking about things on a cosmic scale. So it's something very, impossible probably for us to even wrap our minds around.
So Micah, we talked a bit about what hell is and what that might say about the nature of God, whether or not he's all powerful and good. But there's the other facet of that, which is the criteria for getting into hell and what that might say about God. And we've touched on that a little bit, but what are your thoughts? Like, what are the different takes that you're aware of when it comes to the criteria necessary for a person to avoid hell or not?
Right. So I think if you ask a Christian, they're going to give kind of their theological response, but then in practice, they're going to contradict their own theological thoughts. So the theologically thing they will say is that it really all just is belief in Jesus. Like if you just believe in Jesus, that is what is going to be your ticket out of hell, and you'll be good. But then you start living life and they start seeing you do things that they don't like. And they say, well, a real Christian wouldn't do that. So you must not really believe in Jesus. Therefore, you are going to hell. So then then different things that you do, whether that's with your sexuality, whether that's with your money, whether that's with who you hang out with, things you say, like even just cussing, all these things like, well, a real Christian who believes in Jesus wouldn't do that. Therefore, you must not be saved. So it turns into like, they will say that it is belief in Jesus, but they're going to, through life, use it for a lot of other things, such as like they then they get to define in their minds what constitutes as a belief in Jesus and what doesn't. And I honestly think that says a lot more about them than it does about the person doing different things. Because I know a lot of people who believe absolutely wildly different things about how to live their lives, but both say that they believe in Jesus. So then who is right?
Yeah. And I feel like the dangerous game that you start to play when you start to say, well, you must not really be a Christian because you don't believe or behave in this particular way. And what you're kind of saying there is an invalid understanding of Jesus that a person can have.
Whoa, yeah.
And that invalid understanding invalidates their salvation. And so what somebody is saying in that instance is you have to have a correct understanding of Jesus and what he would expect from you in your life and your behavior in order to be saved. And then once you start opening that can of worms, you have to start considering every single possible understanding of Jesus. Yeah. And that's about as varied as there are number of Christians in the world. Yeah. And so it becomes an impossible task of actually believing in Jesus, the correct Jesus. Yeah. And we just all become hopelessly doomed at that point.
We do, because even denominationally, there are over 40,000, I think, denominations. But like you said, even within those denominations, people are going to believe different things and live their lives in different ways. And then you start throwing in other, like Jehovah's Witnesses who believe in Jesus, just in a different way. Are they wrong? Mormons believe in Jesus, just like not the same way. So are they not? And obviously the circles I've been in are like, well, no, they're not real Christians. But then I start to hear their stories and their experiences in church. And I'm like, man, yours look so similar to mine. It's hard to even differentiate that we were a part of a different religion, quote unquote. So you're right. It just turns into a hopeless experiment of, how can I ever know? Because everybody has all these different understandings, and you like to think that you have the right one because you're terrified of the idea of not having the right answer.
And every time we try to establish some basis for judgment as to the validity of other Christians, there's some critical failure that results. Like, for example, the guiding of the Holy Spirit. well, there's over 40,000 different denominations of Christianity, like you said, and they all believe that they're being prompted by the Holy Spirit in their own ways. And then there's, oh, well, you can tell by the fruits of the person and the fruits of the Spirit. Well, every different denomination is looking for different fruits, or rather, many different denominations are looking for different fruits. And that's evident by the fact that some churches see somebody loving homosexual people and the LGBT plus community, and they see that as being totally fruitful of the Spirit. And then other places see that as being totally fruitful of the lack thereof.
Yeah.
And it's just, I haven't yet to hear a criteria which can actually be applied. And my personal position, I think that it's ridiculous to apply. I think it's ridiculous to try and establish a criteria, and it's totally unnecessary and not representative of any kind of God that I would want to worship.
I agree. So with all of those thousands of denominations and thousands of different criteria, there's also thousands of religions that, what if they could be right as well? And other religions have other views of hell and the afterlife. I was kind of just doing some brief research on like what Buddhists think and Hindus and some of the other major like Eastern religions. And what I found was really interesting. It's actually really rare that one of those other religions believes in an eternal, like ongoing, forever, never ending hell or suffering. It's, which blew my mind at first. I was like, are Christians the only ones who believe this? They're not the only ones, but they're the major one, because some of the other ones believe in a temporary hell where either you are kind of making up for your karma, and a lot of them believe in like a reincarnation. So like your suffering would be in the world. Like if you're a bad person, you'd come back as like a worm, you know? And so I found that really fascinating, because even other religions have an idea of justice, to see that some punishment going on forever and ever just doesn't make sense, and doesn't make sense to them, and doesn't seem to be just, even in an impersonal universe that doesn't have like a like single God that they even claim to be good. Right. And so I found that fascinating. Just some of the other beliefs. Some of them were somewhat like a purgatory. More of them were kind of karma driven with reincarnation. But I think it's important to throw out there that even when talking about the possibility of God or not, and Christianity or not, we've got thousands of other religions, and who's to say that they are wrong when like they are just a product of what they were taught too. You know, they grew up in whatever they were believing in, and like were taught, just like we were as Christians, that they were right. They were taught that they were right, and they have experiences to back up their belief in that they were right. So it once again turns into even more possibilities where like what hope can we have to know what's going to happen?
Yeah, I think it really, just the mere acknowledgement of all of the other beliefs out there and all of the other takes on an afterlife, it just shoots tons of holes in the whole idea of like Pascal's wager, which is a way I feel like hell is oftentimes levied to strong arm people into Christianity. It's that, well, what if you're wrong? What if Christianity is true and you lose everything and you're suffer for an eternity? Well, there's so many other takes on religion, and are we to bend to every single one of them that has an eternal torment end for not believing? But it's kind of nice though that there's, I can see why a person would make an argument like, oh, the ones that where there's an eternal conscious torment as an afterlife, those are the ones that you should really pay close attention to, because if you're going to make it into heaven regardless in all other situations, then that's that. But it's like, if there are other options which are better, why humor it? Why waste your time just living in fear, essentially? Yeah, that's a term that I've heard thrown around a lot that I kind of hate.
Another triggering word. Yeah. Triggering phrase. Yeah, you're right. And I remember seeing an atheist interview saying like, listen, I'm only an atheist to one more God than you are, talking to Christians, because Christians believe in one God, but not any of the other ones. So they're an atheist to all of those other gods except the one. The atheist is like, I just believe in one less God than you do, which I find really interesting because it, for one, decentralizes Christianity as being like the only valid religion and recognizes that, oh, wait, there are thousands of other religions that all maybe could be just as valid. So anyway, I think you started to segue perfectly into, I think, a really good part of this conversation, which is how do people in this real world use this idea of hell? And you kind of brought up Pascal's wager, which is definitely a major one. What are some other ways that you see this applied into our real lives now?
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of examples that I see are purely an attempt to strong arm people into obedience or into compliance with whatever religion, especially Christianity. And there's just this constant aura of fear that's just driving everybody to do the things that they do and to host a Christian youth camp in the middle of a pandemic. So I have not seen it used well. Most of the examples that I'm aware of are bad. The only examples I can think of, which one could argue is good, is I've seen it be used to scare people into a better lifestyle, into making better life choices, where they turn their lives around from a life of crime because they're afraid of hell.
Yeah.
And one could argue, though, that that's not even a very good thing, in that suddenly this person is no longer authentically themselves.
Yeah.
And so has there really been any meaningful change to happen in their lives, or are they just suppressing the horrible person that they are because they want to be rewarded?
Yeah. Maybe their fear of hell became greater than their fear of something else. And so so they're still driven by that fear. It's now just channeled into some other avenue. I also would agree that I've not really seen it used in a good way. I guess the only positive ways that I've seen hell be used is when it's not an eternal conscious torment. And when it's more of finding justice, some kind of purgatory, those kind of things, there's not as much fear around that because, so actually just realizing just fear is it, like the way that it's used is just to instill fear. And so if you are a universalist, they don't like that because now they can't use fear on you because you don't have to be afraid of anything. But if it is an eternal conscious torment, then yeah, you've got to be afraid.
Christians really, really love to levy the fear of hell in a lot of extremely detrimental and damaging ways. Like, on one hand, you have it levied such that it compels people to partake in Christianity. And then on the other hand, you have it where it compels people to kind of stagnate within Christianity, intellectually, spiritually. Like, there is such a grip of fear. I remember, and we've talked about this a little bit before, a fear of asking questions, a fear of one's present position in terms of how much certainty you can express towards your beliefs, and whether or not it's okay for you to be honest about your uncertainties, whether or not it's okay for you to ask your honest questions, and to be anything short of, I am absolutely certain, 100% invested. And man, and just the ways that toxically spills over into the rest of your life and the decisions that you make and the truths that you accept, or rather the claims to truths that you accept. It's just so incredibly damaging. And it makes it really difficult for me to want to back up or even still be within that space that is Christianity.
Yeah, I agree. I've had that same fear in me. And I think there's a couple of things really important that I want to note. For one, we should not be driven by fear. Like our like that is how hell is used. Like just really, if you get down to it, that is how it is used. Hell is used to make people afraid. And that is bad. That is harmful. That is toxic. That is damaging. And like, that's the reason why people have hell trauma. That's why Christians, people who believe that they are saved, have like hell trauma and are afraid of hell, even though they think that they are good, even though they think they're already not even going there. They're still afraid of it. They're afraid for their friends, even afraid for themselves, like asking questions. And that is just such a damaging thing. And some people will say, well, if you're still afraid of it, even though you either don't believe in hell, or if you're not a Christian, and obviously you don't believe in hell if you're not a Christian, most likely. I guess if you'd be an atheist or something, but they would say, well, you're afraid because you know it's true. Fear is not a criteria for truth. It never was, and it never will be. But somehow,
if anything, it's the crutch for untruth.
Yeah. If you claim to be a Christian, there's nowhere that it says fear is even close to a criteria for truth. If anything, the lack of fear is a criteria for truth. Like when you have peace about something, that is what could be true. When fear, like truth is something that sets you free, not puts you in bondage of fear. But that's often what people do with hell, is they put you in bondage, like literally chain you up to this really toxic idea of this suffering that you might incur if you don't believe the right things. And so now you're chained to that. That's not freedom. Like that, if that's true, then you are not free. Like you are not free to explore. You're not free to ask questions because you are in bondage to that belief. If anything, love is a criteria for truth. There's nothing loving about hell. That's nothing. Like I can't think of a single thing unless you just say, well, they're getting what they deserve. That's not loving. Like that says more about you than it does about like this belief being true.
Yep. Just last episode, we were talking about how justice and vengeance are not the same thing.
Yeah.
And that's just something that's way too commonly confused.
So I think it's important for us, especially those people who are triggered by this, like even me, and who maybe have some trauma associated with it. Your fear of it being true is not a criteria for it being true. Like just because you are afraid, and I get that, like it's not that easy to just like flip a switch and like stop being afraid of it. Like I'm not saying, like I think your fear is valid because like I understand, because I share that with you. But remind yourself that just because you're afraid of it, people are going to tell you that means that deep down you know it's true. That's not true. Like there's so many other explanations of why you're afraid of that, and it's because people have used it as a weapon against you from a young age. Why do 5-year-olds need to know about hell? I just nothing in my mind makes that okay. But yeah, that is what happens. That's what you're taught.
And it's the very concept is such a contradiction to everything that, from what I've heard Christians say, is supposed to be true about Christianity, in that you're not supposed to be doing the right thing and being a good person just because you're afraid of hell. You're supposed to be doing it because you were first loved, because you were shown mercy, because you were shown grace. And it's as though hell doesn't have any place. And it's just this really random thing that's thrown in there as a last resort to bend people to your will and to the will of whatever church authorities are abusing it at the moment. It's just, I had to reach a place in my life at one point where I reflected upon the kind of person I was. And I asked the question, am I really a good person if my only motivation is hell? Maybe it's better, maybe it's healthier that I live as though hell doesn't exist. And make my decisions just because I've been loved, because I know what is good and should pursue it, and not because I'm running away from what is bad.
Yeah. You like pretty much said it, but when your belief is kind of centered around avoiding hell, it's an inherently selfish belief. Like, it is inherently selfish, because what are you doing in that? Like, you're believing to save your own skin. Like, that is the basis. That's it. Like, you are trying to save yourself. And like, you'll say, well, no, but I have faith in Jesus. But when you get down to it, a lot of people believe because they don't want to go to hell. And that is inherently selfish. When this whole thing, the whole idea of Christianity is supposed to be selfless. It is supposed to be loving other people and like letting your love be so great that is what guides your life. Yet somehow fear has crept in. Not even crept in, it is just rampant. Like, and that is the driving force of so much of Christianity and even other religions, that it becomes inherently selfish. Like a lot of people don't like to think about that, but it just is, because you're only thinking of yourself in that scenario.
Maybe that's what Jesus was getting at when he was talking about whoever seeks to save his life will lose it, and whoever doesn't will have it. And it's kind of this idea of like, I mean, I could see that. Maybe people who live their lives just because they're afraid of hell are the ones. And I mean, I hate the thought of that, but maybe that's the whole concept of like, if you just live selfishly your whole life, then you're going to you're going to miss out on life.
Yeah.
I mean, I could see it being put that way too, because if you are just living selfishly, then you are forsaking so much of what is good in this world. And if you just accept the fact that hell might be waiting for you at the end and just choose not to care and to love people irregardless, maybe that's where you actually find life. And that's where you actually find a life worth living.
Definitely. Yeah. I feel that, because I feel like since I've let go of my belief in hell, I feel like I have gained my life back, like I feel like that fear obviously is still there, because I was raised to believe that it was true. And so like, there's still some of that like deconstructing that I have to do in my own mind. But I do feel like I am just free to like live life and pursue goodness and love. Like, I'm not like, oh, hell doesn't exist, so I'm going to do horrible things, which is what everybody thinks you're going to do. Guess what? You don't, because you actually do want to be a good person. And that's why probably I was drawn to Christianity at first, because I wanted to be a good person. And I still do. And so I'm not out just doing whatever I want because I don't believe in hell. I want to make this world a better place, because I don't know if there's anything after this. So I want to do the best I can here.
Same.
Yeah. It's a big topic.
All right. It is.
I think
there's a whole nother side to that coin that we'll probably talk about next time, which is paradise or heaven.
Yeah. I think it's important for us to reflect on how our belief in hell reflects on our own character, and how if you think justice is eternal torture for somebody, even somebody who is not like a terrible person, just a normal person that just doesn't believe, I think you need to reflect on what that says about your own heart and how you feel towards those people. Because if you think that's just, then you probably have a really, really bad view of that person, really toxic view. Yeah. And then also just be reflective on how a fear of the afterlife maybe drives your life, and how that can steal so much joy from enjoying things in the moment. Because if we're just trying to get to the afterlife, how could you possibly enjoy just living life now? Things to reflect on, things to think about.
Yeah, and how it can rob you of the joy of loving people, especially those communities which are constantly condemned.
Yeah. So absolutely.
Cool.
All right. Well, always feel free, listeners, to give us feedback and to interact with us. You can find me at Pondering Together on TikTok. You can find Christian at Truth Voyager on TikTok. We've got our episodes up on all the places that you can find. Still waiting on Apple.
Yep. And places that you can comment your feedback would be YouTube. We put up a YouTube video where it's not really a video. It's mostly just like a little title card with the podcast running. Maybe someday we'll put in videos if this becomes something we can pour more of our time into. But for now, it's just an audio podcast.
Awesome. Well, I think this is a good conversation, and I'm excited to have some more.
For sure. Me too. Thank you very much, Micah.
Thank you. And with that, everyone have a great day.
Everybody have a great day.
Can some of my coffee?
Ooh, that sounds
It's
good.
cold. You can reheat it. I'm not going to drink anymore.
Speaking of coffee and cold coffee. Reach. Whoa.